The town of Ash Hollow had a way of swallowing a name. Once they whispered it with gossip, soon it turned to dust, and by sundown, no one remembered the woman it belonged to. That's how it was for Clara Vale. The widow, they said, brought ruin to her husband's ranch, poisoned his cattle, and whispered dark things to the wind. They called her witch, curse-bringer, grief magnet, all the names people use when they're too afraid to say sorrow. The morning she was dragged to the square, the sun didn't rise proper. It just glowed red behind a curtain of dust. Her hands were tied with frayed rope that still smelled of hay and sweat. Her dress, the same one she'd buried her husband in, hung torn and heavy with last night's rain. Sheriff Murdoch read out the charges like a sermon, voice steady, eyes already elsewhere. The town stood still. Shopkeepers with folded arms, wives clutching children, the preacher with his hat pressed to his chest. Only one man didn't move. Jonas Creed, a rancher who'd lost more in silence than any man had words for. He leaned against the post, arms crossed, jaw tight. Folks said he hadn't spoken to God since the war. They said he'd buried a wife and child without once weeping. But when the sheriff looped that rough rope around Clara's wrists, Jonas's boot scraped the dirt. A small sound, but in Ash Hollow, it was enough to turn heads. Clara didn't look at him. Her eyes were on the far hills, where the grass still grew, where her husband's ghost might be walking, waiting. The rope pulled tight, biting her skin, and she thought, this is what love leaves behind. Then a child's voice broke the silence. Sheriff, she didn't do nothing. A little boy, barefoot, hat too big for his head, had stepped out from the crowd. His mother snatched at his shoulder, whispering for him to hush, but the words hung there, trembling like a shot that missed its mark. Jonas's eyes flicked toward Clara again, slow, deliberate. That rope around her wrists wasn't just a sentence. It was something else. Something he knew too well. The wind shifted. The gallows creaked, though no one was on them yet. And in that thin sound, Jonas Creed made the first decision he'd made in years. He stepped off the porch. Jonas moved slow, like a man walking through smoke. Every eye in the square found him, but no one spoke, not yet. He tipped his hat to the sheriff, voice steady, rough as gravel. Sheriff Murdoch, he said, you hang that woman. You'll have to do it without a trial. And that ain't justice. That's fear wearing a badge. The sheriff's jaw tensed. Step aside, Creed. You don't speak for the law. Jonas's boots stopped inches from Clara. She could see the war in his eyes, the same kind that never ended, even after the shooting stopped. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded slip of paper, weathered and signed in fading ink. She's mine, he said quietly. Owed labor for debt settlement. Her late husband owed me 5 head and a mule. Paper says she works it off, not dies for it. The sheriff blinked, thrown. The crowd murmured, a legal tether, a trick, maybe mercy wearing the face of business. Murdoch chewed his lip, looked at the preacher, then spat in the dust. You'll regret this, Creed. She's marked. You take her. The town'll remember. Jonas's hand brushed the rope, binding her wrists. Let 'em remember. When the rope fell away, Clara didn't move. Her wrists bled in a thin, clean line, not deep, but red enough to stain her skirt. She looked up at Jonas, half disbelieving, half daring him to mean it. Why? She whispered. He didn't answer. He just took her arm and guided her toward the hitching post. His horse, a gray gelding with one clouded eye, pawed the ground as if sensing the weight of what was coming. Behind them, the sheriff shouted something about paperwork. But by the time the words hit the air, they were already in the saddle. Clara clutching the horn, Jonas gripping the reins, the town shrinking behind them like a fever dream. The first bullet struck the dirt near the horse's hooves. Jonas didn't flinch. He drove his heels in, the horse leaping forward into the wind. The second shot cracked the sky, ripping past Clara's shoulder. She ducked, tasting dust, rope fiber, and blood on her tongue. They rode until the noise fell away, until the only sound left was the wind's long breath and the sound of her heartbeat thudding against his back. When they stopped, the sun was low and mean, slicing through the cottonwoods. Clara slid from the saddle, knees buckling. She steadied herself with both hands on the dirt. "I didn't ask you to do this," she said. Jonas dismounted, slow. "Didn't say you did." "You think they'll stop?" "No." He looked toward the empty horizon. "But they'll take time to reload." He went to the horse's flank, cutting loose his canteen and tossing it to her. "Drink slow. You'll need the rest." She took a sip, the water warm and tasting faintly of iron. Her wrists burned where the rope had been. Jonas turned, took one long look at her, at the bruises, the fear hiding behind her steadiness. "You still wear his ring," he said quietly. Her eyes hardened. "You still wear yours." Neither spoke again. The sun slipped behind the ridge, and the world turned blue and cold. They made camp in the dry wash below the hill. Jonas built a small fire with careful hands, his movements efficient, practiced, the kind of man who'd made too many fires for too many graves. Clara sat across from him, her back to the canyon wall. "They said I poisoned him," she said at last. Jonas's eyes stayed on the fire. "Did you?" "No." He nodded once, as if that was all the truth needed. Above them, the stars came out sharp and silent. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint sound of a bell from far down the valley. The church, in Ash Hollow, calling for evening prayer. Neither of them prayed. By dawn, the world was nothing but dust and distance. The dry lands stretched wide and empty, the kind of silence that made a person aware of their own bones. Jonas led the horse along a narrow ridge, his coat dark with sweat, Clara walking behind, her bare feet ghosting prints through the sand. Every so often, she'd glance back, that anxious twitch of someone who's been hunted before. A faint smear of dust on the horizon confirmed it. Riders. Maybe 3, maybe more. The sheriff didn't let go easy. Jonas saw it too, though he didn't speak. Just adjusted the rifle strap on his shoulder and nodded toward a dried riverbed below. "We cut through there. They'll lose our tracks by nightfall." Clara hesitated. "And if they don't?" "Then they catch 2 tired souls instead of 1. He said it without edge, a plain truth, nothing more. But it landed between them like a confession neither wanted to touch. They slid down into the ravine. The air grew cooler there, heavy with the smell of sagebrush and old stone. A hawk circled above, its shadow sweeping over them like an omen. As they walked, Clara studied the back of Jonas's neck, the way it tensed, the faded scar just under the collar. "You been in a war?" she asked. "Was." "Who won?" He gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ask the dirt. It buried most of us." They walked on until the horse stumbled. Clara reached for it, murmuring low, hand on its flank. The animal calmed under her touch, nostrils flaring. Jonas watched, quiet. "You got away with beasts," he said. "Beasts don't lie." Her voice carried a crack, not weakness, but the echo of something raw. When they stopped to rest, Jonas found an old branding post, half buried in sand. Wood blackened, iron rusted. He stared at it a while before pulling the small knife from his belt. He carved the shape of a bird into the wood, wings spread wide, facing west, then tossed it into the dying fire. Clara watched the flames lick it to ash. "Why'd you do that?" "That post used to mark cattle, slaves to someone's name." He nodded toward her wrists. "Figured maybe we burn what marks us, too." She said nothing, but her eyes lingered on the smoldering wood. By afternoon, they reached the edge of a dry creek where the earth cracked open like skin. Jonas knelt, scooping a handful of dirt, sniffing it. Habit, instinct. "They're close," he said. "How close?" He looked east, squinting. Close enough to smell fear. They moved faster, the wind rising with grit and static. Clara's hair clung to her face, her skirt heavy with dust. Her breath came sharp, ribs aching. Then came the sound, faint, like thunder in the wrong sky. Hooves. Jonas grabbed her arm. "Down!" They dropped behind a rock shelf, just as the first rider appeared over the ridge, rifle glinting in sunlight. Two more followed. Jonas sighted his rifle over the stone, breathing steady. "Don't move till I say." Clara's heart hammered so loud it drowned the wind. She watched him take aim, clean, silent, like a man doing a job he hated but knew too well. The first shot cracked. A rider fell, horse rearing, screaming. The second shot rang quick, splitting the stillness apart. The last man turned tail, dust flying in his wake. When the echo faded, Clara was shaking. Jonas lowered the gun, his face unreadable. "They'll bring more next time. You didn't have to kill 'em," she whispered. He turned to her, voice flat. "You think mercy's what they'd have given you?" Her throat closed around the answer she didn't have. That night, they found shelter in the ruins of an old homestead. Half-rotten fence, a collapsed roof, ghosts of children's toys buried in the dust. Jonas tied the horse, gathered what wood he could. Clara sat on the step, staring at the horizon where the sun bled out in red streaks. "He was sick," she said after a long silence. "My husband. He begged me to help him go. I gave him laudanum. Too much, maybe. The preacher said it was sin. The town said it was murder." Jonas listened, his face hollowed by the firelight. "You gave him peace," he said simply. "They called it death. They always do, when they can't bear to watch it." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, the space between them didn't feel like exile. Above them, coyotes howled, long and low, the kind of sound that makes you remember you're still alive. Jonas added another branch to the fire. "You got a choice now, Clara Vale," he said. "You can keep running till you break, or we find a place where no one's looking to hang ghosts." Her eyes met his, dry, fierce, and shining all at once. "And what about you, Jonas Creed?" He looked toward the dark. "Guess I'll stop running when you do." The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of rain from far away, the promise of something that might still grow in scorched earth. By morning, the sky had turned to iron. Clouds swelled over the mesas, dark as gunmetal, and the wind carried the dry taste of rain, that bitter scent of something about to break. Jonas knew storms like this. They came hard and left harder. He pushed the horse faster, urging it toward the low cliffs ahead. Clara rode behind him, one arm tight around his waist, her face half hidden in his coat. When the first lightning tore the sky, she flinched, the sound like God splitting wood. Jonas leaned close, voice raised against the thunder. There's a cave up ahead, cattle shelter from the old trail days. They reached it just as the rain came down in sheets. Water slapped the earth like 1,000 angry hands. Jonas led the horse inside, both of them soaked to the bone. The cave smelled of wet rock and bat droppings, but it was dry enough to breathe without swallowing dust. Clara stripped off her shawl, wringing it out. The water dripped red. The rope burns on her wrists reopened, blood mixing with mud. She tried to hide it, but Jonas caught sight. Without a word, he knelt beside her, tore a strip from his undershirt, and wrapped it around her wrists. She watched his hands, steady, gentle, in a way that didn't match his roughness. "You don't have to do that," she murmured. "Wouldn't sit right, letting a wound rot when I could fix it." She gave a small laugh, sharp, almost bitter. "You talk like someone who's been left to rot." He didn't answer right away. The fire he'd kindled flickered against his face, carving lines of grief and grit. "War left plenty of us to it," he said finally. "Lost my wife to fever after. My girl, too. Didn't have the heart to bury 'em proper. Just piled stones and walked away." The storm outside grew louder, swallowing the silence between them. Clara reached out, touched his wrist. "You did what you could." He looked at her. The blood, the dirt, the defiance in her eyes that hadn't died, even after everything. Something softened in him, something he'd been too proud to name. Lightning flashed again, lighting up the cave. Clara caught a glint on his forearm, a burned mark, the faint outline of a brand, half faded with age. She frowned. "They marked you?" Jonas's voice dropped low. "Army didn't like deserters. I left when I realized they were killing boys, not soldiers. They branded us, cowards, traitors." He stared at the mark, jaw tight. "Thing about iron, it remembers longer than a man should." Without thinking, Clara reached for the poker from the fire. The metal glowed orange. Jonas tensed, eyes narrowing. "What are you—" She pressed the poker into the sand beside her. "We can't change what they burned into us, but we can decide what stays." Then slowly, she lifted the hot iron and laid it over the scar on her own wrist. The rope burned still raw. The hiss filled the cave like a scream. Jonas lunged forward, but she didn't move, didn't cry out. When she pulled it away, the skin was blistered, but clean. "No more ropes," she said quietly. "No more collars." Jonas stared at her, at the courage in that small, terrible act. Then he reached for his own arm, lifted his sleeve. "Hand me the poker." She shook her head. "You don't have to. Neither did you." She passed it to him. He pressed it against his brand, jaw locked tight. The smell of burning flesh mixed with rain and smoke, the sound low and final. When it was done, he dropped the poker and sat back, breathing hard. The mark was gone, replaced by a raw circle, same as hers. Outside, the storm began to fade. Rain softened. Thunder rolled itself into the hills. Inside the cave, the fire burned steady, reflecting in both their eyes. Two wounded souls who had just remade themselves in flame. Clara leaned her head against the rock wall. "They'll keep coming," she said. Jonas nodded. "Let 'em. They'll find ghosts." For a long time, they sat in silence. The storm passed, leaving behind a washed-out quiet, the kind that feels like a prayer's last breath. When they finally stepped out, the land was changed. The air smelled clean. The horizon stretched wide and pale. Jonas lifted her onto the horse, climbed up behind. "You reckon we can start again somewhere?" she asked. He looked toward the far ridge where sunlight broke through. "Everywhere starts somewhere." They rode on, the sound of the horses' hooves soft in the damp earth. Their burned marks hidden beneath sleeves, not erased, but claimed. By the third day, the land began to change. Hills turning to red clay, rivers cutting deep scars through the earth. Folks called it Red Valley, though most avoided it. The soil there was said to drink blood, and the wind carried voices from wars too old to name. Jonas and Clara reached the valley by sundown, the light gone copper and low. Their horse limped from miles of hard ground, and both were hollow-eyed with hunger and dust. They found an abandoned way station, a single-room shack with half a roof, a rusted lantern still hanging by the door. Inside, the air smelled of old oil and loneliness. Clara sank onto the floorboards, pressing her palms to the earth. "We can rest here," Jonas said, setting down his rifle. "For how long?" He didn't answer. They both knew the question meant more than one night. The quiet stretched, thick as smoke, until a sound cut through it, faint at first, then clearer. Hooves, many of them. Clara's breath caught. "They found us." Jonas stepped to the doorway, eyes on the ridge. A line of riders moved against the dying light. Sheriff, preacher, 3 townsmen with rifles slung low. Dust trailed behind them, like judgment made visible. He turned back to Clara. "You ride for the West Trail. I'll hold him." Her voice sharpened. "No!" "Clara." "No," she said again, standing. Her wrists still bore the fresh burns, the marks of choice, not shame. "I won't run from them again." He stared at her, the same woman he'd seen with rope at her wrists, face hollow from fear. Now she stood like stone, eyes bright in the half-light. Jonas nodded once, quiet and grim. "Then we face 'em together." They stepped outside as the posse rode in, horses snorting, guns gleaming. The sheriff dismounted first, face pale in the dusk. "You should have stayed gone, Creed," he said. "Now you'll hang with her." Jonas's voice came low, slow. "You talk a lot about hanging for a man who never built nothing but gallows." The preacher raised his Bible, voice trembling. "The woman's a sinner. She confessed to witchcraft." Clara laughed then, soft, broken, and defiant all at once. "No, preacher. I confess to mercy. You just didn't have the stomach for it." A murmur rippled through the men. Doubt, small, sharp, like a thorn in a boot. Jonas took a step forward. "You gonna shoot a woman for that? Or you gonna face what's left of your own souls?" The sheriff raised his gun, not shaking but not steady either. Then, from the back of the group, came a sound none expected, a child's voice. "Don't hurt her!" It was the same boy from Ash Hollow, his little face streaked with dust, his mother clutching his arm, but not pulling him back this time. The men froze. Even the horses shifted, uneasy. Jonas lowered his gun, letting the silence do the work. Clara stepped forward until she stood beside the sheriff's horse. She reached up, touched the noose still hanging from his saddle. The same rope that once marked her death. Without a word, she took it, walked to the fire Jonas had started by the door, and dropped it in. The rope curled and blackened, the smell of burning hemp thick in the air. The preacher's voice faltered. You can't." "I can," she said, "because it's mine now." The crowd said nothing. The only sound was the crackle of rope turning to ash. The firelight painted their faces, and something shifted there. Not belief, maybe not forgiveness, but recognition. The sheriff holstered his gun. "Get out of Ash Hollow," he muttered. "Don't come back." Jonas nodded once. "That's all we ever wanted." The posse turned away one by one, horses kicking up slow trails of dust. When they were gone, The valley felt too big, too empty, like the first breath after a burial. Clara watched the last ember of the rope fade to black. "It's done," she said softly. Jonas looked at her, his voice almost a whisper. "No, it's just started." He knelt, scooped a handful of the ashes, and pressed them into the dirt. Then he took a flat stone and laid it over them, a marker, small and simple. "For what we buried," he said. She nodded. "And what we kept." They stood there a long while, side by side, as the night settled in around them, two burned souls standing in a valley that had seen too much blood and just enough grace. When the wind rose, it carried the ashes westward, thin streaks of smoke drifting toward open land, where no one asked for names. Jonas turned to her. "We'll find a place," he said. She gave a faint smile. "We already did." And in the fading light, you could almost believe the land was listening, the Red Valley holding their secret like it had always been waiting for them. Spring came late to Red Valley. It crept in like a weary traveler, slow and uncertain, scattering pale wildflowers among the clay. The rains softened the edges of the old, scarred earth, and for the first time in years, the ground smelled of life instead of dust. Jonas and Clara built a small home by the river bend, if you could call it that. 4 walls of sun-dried brick, a roof patched from wagon canvas, a door that never quite shut against the wind. But it stood, and for folks who'd once lived under judgment and sky alone, that was enough. Every morning, Clara tended the small patch of soil behind the house. She'd found a handful of bean seeds in a trader's pouch Jonas brought back from town. The first time she pressed them into the earth, her hands trembled, maybe from hope, maybe from memory. Jonas watched her from the porch, coffee in hand, his hat tilted low. He'd grown quieter over the months, not empty quiet, but settled, like a man who'd finally stopped waiting for ghosts to follow him. Once, near dusk, she asked him, "You ever think about going back?" He didn't look up. "Ain't nothing left there but shame and stories that ain't true." She nodded, pressing a seed deeper into the soil. "That's what I thought, too. Then I realized stories don't end where folks stop talking. They end where someone stops running." He smiled at that, small, almost hidden. "Guess that makes us the last chapter." Days turned to weeks. They spoke little, but said plenty. In the nights, the coyotes still sang, and sometimes Clara would lie awake listening, tracing the small circular scar on her wrist, her chosen mark, the one that burned away the rope. Jonas's arm bore the same scar, healed now, pale against the sun-dark skin. One morning, after a hard wind, they found a small stone lodged in the garden soil, round, smooth, marked by a streak of black through its center. Clara held it in her palm. "Looks like fire trapped in rock," Jonas said. "Maybe it is," she replied. She placed it at the garden's edge, half buried, like a promise to whatever would come next. That night, as the fire cracked low inside their home, Jonas said, "You think they ever tell our story in Ash Hollow?" Clara thought for a while before answering. "Maybe, but not how it happened." "Does that bother you?" She looked out at the stars, the endless silence of the valley. "No. Truth don't need witnesses, just roots." Jonas nodded slowly, the lines around his eyes soft in the firelight. "Then we've done right." He reached out, his rough hand brushing hers. Not claiming, not saving, just resting there, warm and steady. A small act, but one that felt like defiance against all the noise of the world. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of the river over stones. water running through land that once only knew drought. Somewhere beyond the hills, a lone horse neighed, free and unseen. By dawn, the valley shimmered with mist. The beans had sprouted, tender shoots curling through the dirt, green against the red. Clara knelt beside them, pressing her palm flat to the soil. Jonas came to stand beside her. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The world, for the first time, didn't ask them to explain themselves. As the sun rose over the red cliffs, its light caught the smooth, black-streaked stone beside the plants, making it glow faintly, a quiet sign that something once burned there, and something new had chosen to live. And maybe that's how legends start, not with victory, but with two people who refuse to vanish. Some say if you pass through Red Valley after the rain, you can still see the old homestead, half sunk, half standing. A garden grows there, stubborn and wild, and at its edge, a small dark stone catches the sun, like an ember that never died. And if you listen close enough, the wind might whisper the story of a widow at her breaking point, and the cowboy who refused to let her fall.